Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. I'm really delighted to be able to offer you a series of talks that I had with my very dear friend and my colleague, Shane McDermott, all about humans being, about our archetypal patterns, and about the fascinating difference that that makes to us in terms of how we deal with modern life. It's a tricky thing. And if we know our archetypal patterns, we can honour our shape, our style, and our somatic archetypes in terms of how we move and what movements suit us the best. But before we get to that, we really want to understand the advantages of knowing those somatic archetypes and why they make such a difference to us in terms of time and space. It can be very healing knowledge. And Shane has been generous enough to share his thoughts, his time, his 40 years experience as a practitioner, but also as someone who works in the wild with animals, who understands nature, who has a devoted spiritual practice, but who, like me, is very keen on sharing that in terms of practical application, knowing the difference that it can make to all of us. So we're busting to share it with you. And we have a gorgeous series, a playlist on space and time. And this particular episode, after the one in which we talked about the 4 levels of listening, introduces you to the idea of archetypal pattern and of how we work with space and time, getting you ready to understand the very different ways in which time works in our lives, the knowing of which can actually make the difference in how you deal with everyday life. And P.S. John Sharkey, clinical anatomist, who possibly knows as much about fascia as anyone in the world in terms of the human body, calls it the tissue of temporality for very, very good reason. So I'm weaving these ideas together for you in the hope that you'll have some light bulb moments. So welcome to the first of a series, or the second in a series, of gorgeous chats between me, Joanne Avison, and my very, very dear friend, Shane McDermott. Enjoy. So, my dear friend, Shane McDermott, how would you describe yourself? Because you're kind of one of those people that you're a photographer, you're a therapist, an explorer, so many things. How would you describe yourself?
That's difficult. Maybe like a contemporary Renaissance man.
That'll do. That'll do.
Yeah.
Contemporary Renaissance man. Yeah. So I met you. How long ago did I meet you? Something like 25 years ago. Because we met both as teachers with Tom Myers. We were teaching his work in Maine.
Mm-hmm. Remember the day well.
Then you rescued me. I remember I was a model and they were learning how to manipulate the IT band on me. And I was,
Oh, yes.
Previously, this guy had been a sheep shearer on a farm. And I was lying on my side, gesturing you from the other side of the room, will you get over here and teach this guy what to do? And I remember you standing there saying to him very gently, when you work with a body, you tell a story and it has a beginning and a middle and an end. I'm lying there in agony thinking, just get on with it. Just
So stop shearing the sheep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those were the days. And then I think straight after that, Caroline Myss was teaching the Archetypes live in Chicago.
Yeah.
And we began together. We did 5 years training with her one way and another, didn't we?
Yeah, that was quite a period, wasn't it? It really allowed us to both up-level our understanding and integrate so much of what we had previously studied. That was a really deep integration for me, working with Caroline.
What do you think? I mean, we could talk about this for weeks, but what do you think was the key in the power of understanding what we could call the soulic or the cosmic archetypes, the archetypes each one of us comes in with, the unique set? I have, quite a lot to say about how it transformed my body work and had me understand the fascial system so much better because I realized the unique exploration and expression of it in each person, which has fascinated me ever since. What do you think the impact of that was in your body work?
Well, I think what was really profound in what I learned from Carolyn was how she mapped out the archetypes through the Chronos, Kairos, and Cosmic, which I interpreted as our personal archetypes, our sort of collective archetypes as humanity, and then the cosmic archetypes. And that was a very, very powerful distinction because I had only thought of archetypes sort of from the Jungian perspective prior to that. And when I started to learn those distinctions of the archetypal realm, it brought in a lot of clarity that, yeah, archetypes are more like a nested hierarchy of information and intelligence and emergent qualities.
Mm.
And what shows up in our personal sort of natal archetypes can be very personalized to us. And all of these energies are alive and functioning in our body mind. So when working with people through body work, feeling sort of like the crystallized matrix of their personal archetypal energy
Absolutely.
at made manifest in their body.
Mm.
And there was another sort of key integration that took years of, and I think you've probably come up against this, is working with people in their body work, just body work, and not through the psyche or the emotional body or the energetic body. I'm left with just sort of the material matter of their being. But when I started to work with coaching and combining coaching with body work, I started to better understand, the larger archetypal energies of their sort of soul archetypes or cosmic archetypes. A lot of people are fairly disconnected with sort of the higher order intelligence of how they want to become in the world. Like a lot of people have very creative capacities that are never expressed. They're sort of body bound to their personal archetypes. And then to start to recognize that there's higher order intelligence, desires, yearnings, longings that want to be made manifest through their direct experience of their body, that can be unlocked in the coaching work.
Yeah.
And then start to work with that sort of deeper yearning and longing in the experience of their body, and have that made manifest through movement. Now we're starting to work with all three dimensions of the cosmic, the collective, and the personal archetypal energies. So it really set in motion, her teachings, sort of an evolution of my work that has taken 20 plus years to really manifest into a very synthesized understanding and approach of that we have at least all three of these dimensions alive and active in our body minds.
I love that. And I know for myself, I found that somebody would come to me with an issue, and usually it had a physical name, and they may or may not know the names of the body parts that were hurting or aching or whatever. But then what happened with the archetype understanding is that the way they expressed their history, it wasn't just the story of that history, it was the way they did it, that history. And so very often I found that people were imposing on themselves like a movement protocol or um, a sport or some sort of movement system, let's say that actually superimposed an archetypal pattern over them that didn't necessarily match their, let's say, their Chronos archetype, the historic archetypes that Caroline describes as the ones we come in with, the 12 that already vote before we start anything. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've had such a great time teaching this as a program in its own right and coaching people in their own archetypes. But what is so beautiful, I love what you say about the hierarchy. It's not a hierarchy that one is better than the other. It's a hierarchy in that one is deeply embedded in your history and one is present in your being now. And the other is this kind of universal expression. And for me, it gives people a sense of congruency when they find the movement that they can express that through. Is that
Yes.
is that
Yes.
something you found? Because we haven't had a chance in the last couple of years to share that much of these results. I'm just fascinated at what you're reflecting.
Yeah. There's one word that you used earlier is of imposing these energies on the body mind.
Yeah,
And um, boy, there's a lot of threads to pull on here. Um,
we've got time.
when we start, yeah, when we start to consider sort of how did our body mind come to be like this? Like, how did our body come to be configured as it is? There's many forces at play. And what I think is so relevant for movement and body work practitioners is to recognize not just in the people they work with, recognize how our body has become patterned through sort of impositional energies, a lot of societal energies that are imposed on our body, how we move our body through space on a day-to-day basis. So there's a few points I'm going to weave together. What I'm talking about is in our modern culture, what has been so infused is this coupling of time and purpose. And for a large number of people in the modern world, our purpose is defined through our work. And a lot of our work is not aligned to our higher calling,
I
our
think
deepest yearnings, our soul yearnings.
yeah.
So a lot of our time and energy and life force output is fused into this safety and survival game of generating enough wealth to just live. And
Survive.
our body is a large part of our day. Our body is organized around these kinds of movements
Yes.
where we're getting up and doing the grind hours and hours every day. We're just sort of engaged in what we have to do to pay the bills, to make a living, to perform our duties and our work and what's expected of us. To just, it's like it becomes a cost. You've heard of the phrase of cost of living, right?
Yes.
What's the cost of being alive?
In the world.
And
Yeah.
yes, the cost of being alive in the world of where do we invest our life force every day? And our life force is intimately coupled to time, our relationship to time. So it's this fusion of time and life force because as we engage in our days, whatever that looks like, whatever our particular work is like, whether it's aligned with our passion or really completely misaligned with our passion, it's organizing the structure and shape of our body, literally. It's creating the shape and structure of our body and being because so much time and life force is invested into the particular way that we're required to move our bodies every day. What I think needs to happen through body work, movement therapy, and coaching is this decoupling of time and life force so that we have more available time to work with expressing and moving our body in space that feels deeply aligned to our soul's calling. More playtime, more just freedom to explore and not be engaged in these sort of outcome oriented tasks that we are obligated to perform. Is that making sense?
It makes perfect sense. And what comes to me when you say that, because I'm actually, what I'm doing in my head is thinking, okay, let's think. You get up first thing in the morning, you walk to your station where you're getting on your train, or you get to your car and you drive to your office, and you do the job that you're paid the money that I remember doing this many times in my life where I literally didn't have time to spend the money I was earning. I just had to keep the treadmill going.
Yeah.
And that you come back in the evening or at the end of that purposeful hours that you've done your job. And I'm not suggesting anybody shouldn't do that job. That's what they need to do. But
Yeah.
then comes the point where in an ideal world, you're actually free to then express yourself for that couple of hours after you've got home, and you're absolutely exhausted and you're hungry, and you turn to food, stroke drink, stroke some sort of socialization procedure, whatever that is. In England, we go to the pub, or in France, you go to the cafe and have coffee, or whatever you're doing. And it's I wonder what it has to do with community and family, where, I was brought up with family mealtime was a very, very big thing. And my mother insisted till I left home at, in my 20s. My mother absolutely insisted that we all sat around the table at 7 o'clock every night and we socialized. We had beautiful food that she served us, and everyone had a chance to tell their story. And it was a ritual. And I think it really helped us break that cycle
Mm.
and somehow be together. And it decoupled the day from the evening. That's one thing. But the other is, do you think addiction plays a game in this, that we're burying this incongruency, this dislocate, this total devotion to the work pattern ethic to survive process, that we then get involved in drink or sport or anything almost in an addictive way to bury the difficulty? Does that make sense? Does it make sense that we just try and hide it and cover it rather than reveal it and uncouple it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think addiction on many levels plays a really integral part in this. You know, it's in the modern culture where I would venture to say enslaved to this exchange of time for money,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? And a large part of our day is engaged in that, and how we move our body through space, through relationships, through different environments, through different task-oriented patterns, where there's a real sort of insidious lock that binds us to a particular kind of behavior. And that is reflected in the health of our bodies and the state of our minds. Where I think a lot of the sort of addictive stimulus comes into that is that's a very contracted state to live in for most people. A lot of people hate their jobs, something you're doing for 8 to 10 hours a day. If you include commute times and getting ready for work, it's a huge portion of our day, and people hate it. So this is a very contracted state. And what I think stimulus, whether it's alcohol or drugs or social media, it creates a release. It offers a temporary reprieve and a
Yeah.
sense of freedom from the contracted state of expectation and assumption that we're going to just show up like this on a regular basis. And these kinds of not non-ordinary states, they create a state alteration through food, through alcohol, through stimulants, through sex, through social media, through all these stimulus. It creates an opportunity for us to temporarily release the bind and expectation, the contracted state that we often function in.
Yeah.
So, and it does become a release and an outlet and potentially an addiction.
So is there another way that we can release that, or at least is there something else we can focus on? Because I mean, I've known you for a long time. I know that you are not addicted to that hamster wheel process. So what is it that you coach your clients to reach or question, to unbind those bindings, given that, they didn't just win the lottery and they can suddenly go out and play and be released financially from their obligations? What you're talking about, I suspect, is a shift in thinking and a shift in modus operandi, a shift in awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a big shift in awareness. So if we go back to the Chronos, Kairos, cosmic, of Chronos being a large part of our history, we could just think of it as like the infinity sign. And this side of the infinity sign would be the history. This side would be the cosmos or mystery. And
Mhm.
in between is the Kairos, the present moment of what's expected, just the suchness of our life as it is, our current job, our current family, whatever is current and present in our lives is sort of what is. So we could look at Chronos as what was, Kairos as what is, and cosmos or mystery as what if.
Beautiful.
So it's a history and mystery through the infinity sign.
Yeah.
And that intersection in between is the present moment, Kairos, just what our life is. What's really important in my coaching work is helping people access what I call true nature, which would be sort of that state that never changes, the realization of self that never changes. It is not subject to impermanence. We look at our work states, our family states, our stimulus distracted states, our addictive states, all of that is subject to impermanence. It all, your workday arises, it's here for a while, for a few hours, and then it dissolves and goes away. And then the experience of family, so we can substitute experience for state. So your work experience, your family experience, your addictive experiences, whatever those are, consider them states, and they're temporary. They come and go. They're here for a while and they go. Doesn't matter how good whether it's alcohol or drugs or plant medicines or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It arises, it stays for a while, and it's gone.
Yeah. Just can't get enough
What's
episodes.
Yes, exactly.
Whatever it is that you're binge watching.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Well,
exactly.
I've been
That's what
there.
makes
It's
it
like,
addictive.
exactly. Like I've had such a day and I just think, do you know what? I need to do something mindless. And I literally find something that I know I'm going to get very upset when the last episode, you're like longing for another season. So I get,
Yes,
so
yes,
that's what we're talking about. Temporary.
yes. So it's experience substitution or
Yeah.
state substitution. What I think is really important is to come into some direct realization, contact, awareness of a really sacred part of our human condition that is not subject to impermanence. It's always already here. And that's what I call true nature.
True nature.
And we can access that through conscious dream practices, through conscious meditation practices, through conscious movement practices. There's many ways of accessing it.
Mm.
And it's not something that we have to grab to attain. It's not hard to attain. It's impossible to avoid. It's always already present.
That's so beautiful. So what you're actually saying is, I think I know, is you're saying it's getting out of our own way. It's releasing that which is there's a beautiful word, and it's in the Harry Potter series of magic. It's called the obfuscatory spell. Obfuscate being to cover in with mist, to obfuscate, to make
Oh, yeah.
to see. And what you're saying is you dispel that obfuscation, that thing that's in the way. In Sufism, it's referred to, I believe, as the unchanging nature within, the
Yeah.
essence that
Yes.
many people are like running away from, but they're taking it with them. And we all are. I'm not making myself different from anybody else. It's that already there-ness,
Yes.
because it's
Y-
not remarkable.
Right. Yes. The Sufis also refer to it as the supreme self.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yes. And this is the always already present, abiding true nature of who we are. So a big part of my coaching work and body work
Mm.
is inviting people into that. I also refer to it as the still point.
No.
So through body work, there's a lot of times that I just come to stillness. I get people to work with their breath in a way that allows them to feel the release and the spaciousness of their body. Because when we're sort of enslaved in that fusion of exchanging time for life force and and pursuing goals and outcomes that are not aligned to our highest purpose, their expectations, there's a lot of sort of neurological, energetic, muscular energy that is put into that pursuit. When we can get people on the table and working with the breath and bringing them into a still point realization, I call it the space in between.
Mm.
The space in between to me is the access point. The space in between the busyness of our movements, the space in between our emotions, the space in between our thoughts, the space in between our desires, the space in between our breaths. We start to realize that there is a access point or a portal into something that is vast, unbounded, spacious. And when people can start to tap into that regularly, and I guide people into how would you do that in your unique form of work, whatever that is. Maybe they're an accountant, maybe they're a grocery checker, maybe a car mechanic. How do you access that still point as a deep remembering on a daily basis? Because it's really a process of forgetting. Our true nature, although always already present, we forget it. And we get caught in this incessant sort of busyness and doing and caught in the something game rather than the recognition of release, of nothing, which is the still point.
And I love what you're saying, because also it's not popular, right? You know, you think of a child at school, and you referred to this early on about the conditioning. If a child at school is sitting doing nothing, that's like, what are you doing? Well,
Yeah.
are you daydreaming? What are you doing? It's not, they don't mean, what are you doing? They mean, why aren't you doing?
Yeah, exactly. That's a better question. Why aren't you doing? Yes, because that's what's expected of you. Do.
Yeah.
Why aren't you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're doing matters because it's who you are.
Yeah.
And these are collapsed distinctions. That what you're saying is, do you have a moment to be and spend that moment, and then spend a few more moments with that moment? And I think that's where I think magic happens, personally.
Yeah. And you know from your own body work, when we can guide people into that direct experience of the still point, there's incredible neurological release. There's incredible muscular fascial release
Yeah.
because so much of our nervous system, all physiological processes in our body, so much of our nervous system and the fascial system is engaged and organized around purposeful movement. What is and what is your sort of unique body mind architecture of how you have to engage your life? And that's so on. And there's a tonicity of our nervous system, our fascial system, our mental body, our emotions is all engaged in doing, doing, doing. So when we can touch those points of release and sort of facilitate those experiential points of release, all that can let go. And a lot of sort of deeply conditioned pattern tensions, postural tensions, trauma patterns can release very quickly.
I love that, and Paul Thornley makes a very good distinction. It's beautiful. We talk about this a lot in myofascial magic. That people talk about myofascial release almost as if it's like a guy wire that you've somehow taken the little button and you've released it, and that's not actually. Paul says the better word is relief. It's
Yeah,
actually relief, isn't it? You
yeah,
just literally,
yeah,
it's like dropping into an armchair of yourself going, oh my goodness. And you find out you actually don't have far to fall because you're dropping into this beingness, this, oh, that you don't have to hold on to the posture. It's almost like you don't have to hold on to the pose.
yes,
Like the yoga that happens when you're walking to the mat and you're in between the postures. You know, in my yoga class, I could care less whether someone can do tree pose with one leg and their groin and the other leg and all da 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 da. It's the process of the gathering into the ability to bring two parts of the body together and then just express this open-hearted joy. It just joy
yes,
comes up. You get giggling in the
yes,
classroom,
yeah, yeah,
and there's no explanation.
yeah. And when we can access and facilitate that release or relief,
Yeah, yeah.
the body, the architecture of our body mind, it's very important. They're not separate. Our
No.
body mind takes on a natural and authentic configuration.
Mm.
This is where poise happens, where we're just in the natural expression of who we are because we're abiding as our true nature, not our sort of contrived, postured self according to our personal and societal expectations. That's all posturing. To be able to access that space in between and experience the release and the relief, then we can embody poise, where the body just takes on its natural configuration. And this is where a lot of deep trauma, holding patterns, contraction habits can just literally be let go of very quickly.
They literally can fall away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there doesn't have
Yeah.
to be drama, there doesn't have to be tears. It's
No.
and I think we can get so attached to our trauma and our concerns that it's almost as if we let them shape us. You know, that the holding of them. I'm not criticizing, for God's sake. I've studied trauma and worked with the body, you know, like you for the last, you've worked longer than me, I think. Um, but I have huge respect and honor for it. What I'm talking about is the agony that people go through trying to understand it, trying to analyze it, trying to work out what it means as distinct from letting it go, not needing it
Yeah.
anymore,
Yeah.
finding out that something fuller and more purposeful is ready to emerge and be the foundation of them, expressing them as they are.
Yeah. And certainly the body will have its own natural release of a lot of the trapped energy
Yeah.
through just sort of this contrived way of being and posturing in the world
Mhm.
and sort of these ways that we engage in purpose that aren't aligned to our deeper soul essence. So those binds, as those energetic binds release, yeah, we can experience profound sort of somatic releases and tears and all sorts of things. Where it becomes potentially problematic is to generate stories around that, what that therefore means.
Mm.
Then the head sort of hijacks the somatic experience and we give meaning to it instead of just allowing the body to experience and release its whatever these energetic binds are for us.
Mm.
And that can be, big somatic releases, big cathartic releases, big traumatic, what we could frame as traumatic releases, but it's like the body exhaling a lot of pent-up energy that it doesn't need. And this gives an immense freedom to our posture, to our ranges of motion, to ways that we can express movement through the body. And it can happen very quickly.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a long, drawn out series.
No, it doesn't. I think this has really radical implications for how we hold the process of healing. Because from sort of our linear rational mind,
Yeah.
healing needs to be very sequential. It needs to be a chronological
I was
process.
going to say it's time bound to linear time.
It's
So
time bound.
Yeah. So if you had a big trauma and it happened a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you've got to have a relative time bound period of release that is at least the same again, almost.
Y-
Like, I'm not saying
y-
that's true for a minute, but I'm saying there's this linear analysis of it.
Yes, yes, exactly. And this is a conceptual way of holding healing, that we have this concept that it unfolds in a very linear, rational way that's sequenced and processed over a timeline.
Yeah.
That if you're going to heal from trauma, you have family of origin trauma, relational trauma, death trauma, whatever it is, here's the steps, the step-by-step sequence and process of how that's going to unfold. And clearly our relationship to time and space is changing radically.
Oh,
And
it is. Yeah. It just can't be kept in a linear box anymore, right?
it can't.
No.
No,
I mean, it
it
didn't belong there in the
absolutely
first
can't.
place. Yeah. But yeah, definitely.
And to me, this is where, going back to history and mystery, the whole rational linear process of healing is embedded in our history, because this is the way it's always been done. If you want to heal from trauma or addiction or whatever it is, here's the process, the 12 steps process or whatever it is. There's
Mhm.
so many protocols and processes out there. And it's not that they're not valuable, but some of that needs to be included, but we also need to transcend it. So it's a transcend and include kind of dynamic. When we're talking about the body, or
Yeah.
what in my coaching practice is called awakening the wisdom body. It's not about the conceptual process and protocol of healing. When we can start to awaken, remember, and recall our true nature,
Hmm.
it's timeless. We don't need time. So we're transcending time, and that can be experienced at the level of the body as well. So that there's what I'm discovering in working with my own traumas and history, there's ways, and working with that with my clients, there's new emergent ways of working with what we'll call trauma, which is just basically stuck life force. It's bound up life force, whether it's on the mental level, emotional level, physical level, spiritual level. It's
It's bound.
life force that can't be present.
That
It's
can't free itself.
bound.
Yeah.
Yes. Can't.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like a bound book that the story is written in, and the back of the book is bound and it has a spine and it's bound to that story, and it's copyright and it's mine. I mean, I'm so guilty of this, is ridiculous. I'm an author, for God's sake. And it's the what you've written in that book or read in that book, it belongs in the book almost.
Yeah.
And no one's taking that book from me because I wrote it and it's mine. And it matters.
Yep. Yep.
That story, I mean, is just it becomes literally, you are book bound to your story almost.
Yes. And look at how the information is sequenced and
Mm.
processed in a very sequential, step-by-step unfolding. You want to learn, like your books are absolutely brilliant and you want to learn the information, there's a sequential process of how you
Sort of. Yeah.
ingest that information,
Yeah.
right? And it's very similar with our life experiences in our history. I'll use a metaphor here because this is really interesting. So imagine a string of mala beads.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a single strand. There's 100 beads on this strand. Okay. And there are 10 repeating colors. So the first 10 different colors, then they repeat for the second 10, they repeat for the third 10.
In
We
the
could
same
say
order.
that,
So it
yep,
goes red, orange, yellow, so on, then red, orange,
yep,
yellow, so on, all the way through.
yep, yep,
10 tens. Yeah.
10 tens. Let's say that's the extent of a human life. Okay. The string is time. The beads would represent 1 year of our life.
Okay.
From a linear bound perspective of time and how we process our experience or assimilate knowledge, if we're at a particular, like I'm at the 60th bead of my life, it's going to go for 150, by the way, but
We know
we'll
that.
just keep with it with
Yeah.
100.
We know. Yeah.
So I'm at the 60th bead.
Yeah.
If I'm in the linear perspective of time and space,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to go back and experience or a particular beautiful moment of my life or clear a particularly traumatic experience of my life, I have to go through that timeline and through all those experiences
Back through the
to,
beads.
yes, which is a practice of absence, not presence. I'm leaving the present moment to go back in time to understand what happened.
Got it.
So that, from that perspective, it's a practice of absence, not presence. And then I need to sequence what happened. If it's a trauma, something couldn't make sense of, something that was very impactful to me, I have to sequence it year by year, moment by moment, in a very process-oriented way.
Yeah. And recreate
To,
those moments in order to go into
yes,
them in depth and contextualize them. You're absent from the present moment. You're in the historical moment, recalling the context and
yes,
reconfiguring it with your awareness to the level that you can. Yeah.
yeah. In order to release or retrieve something, basically what I'm looking at getting back is stuck life force that has been displaced out of the present moment and locked into my history.
Got it.
So it's it's a retrieval process. I'm
Yes.
attempting to retrieve lost life force that is no longer present.
Yeah.
Right?
Got it.
So that's a very linear process of time and space. Now let's take that string of 100 mala beads, colored mala beads, and we connect it. And now it's a circle.
Yep.
Okay. Now we step into a different relationship of time and space. Now it's cyclical time and space. Now we can start to see the repeating patterns. In the linear relationship, once that experience is gone, we can never fully get it back. We can try to retrieve it. Some of the aspects, the learnings, the understandings, what was my lesson I needed to learn from that, but we can't re-experience it. When we look at cyclical time and space, now we start to see how nature organizes time and space. Everything is repeating. Everything. We get to re-experience it, not in the same way, but in new ways. And this is so embedded in our physiology through our sleep patterns. Every night we go through gross, subtle, causal states of consciousness from waking, dreaming to deep dreamless sleep. We get to experience that every single night for however many years we're on this planet. And what's important as I work through these analogies is to recognize it's not an either or. It's a nested both and hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're in cyclical time and space, it doesn't mean that linear time and space no longer exists. It does. And it doesn't mean that what I'll call cosmic or resonant time and space no longer exists. It does. It's all at once. There's an all at once kind of consciousness that we can experience, an all at once way of being embodied. So when we're in cyclical time and space, we start to recognize so much of how we perceive reality is organized by the movement of the sun and the moon, which is cyclical. Every 24 hours, we experience something similar. The migration patterns of animals and birds on our planet, the seasonal cycles, it's all repeating. It's all repeating. And to start to be able to access that as an embodied way of being can release us from this sort of bind of linear time and space, so that we start to experience the cyclical patterns of our mind going, like when we wake up in the morning, our mind starts to become engaged and we access what's called more beta wave consciousness and beta and alpha. And then as our day starts to wind down and the light, the quality of light gets lower in the day, we start to shift into slower brainwave frequencies to where we go to bed at night and we start to enter into dream consciousness, which is theta wave consciousness. And then when we drop into deep dreamless sleep, our brain cycles into delta and gamma wave frequencies, which are very, very, delta is very slow and gamma is very fast, but highly coherent, organized brain waves. This is where we actually access and remember true nature. But we're so identified with sort of beta alpha consciousness, which is waking, we forget. We forget and we get back into this sort of habituated way of being in our body and brain, and we engage our bodies in these sort of enslavement patterns again, day in and day out. And we forget these access points of our true nature. So what I do a lot with my coaching work through meditation, through very intentional dream yoga practices, is help people remember and access these true nature states, because they're cyclical. Every human being goes through this every single day. And isn't it interesting that for 1/3 of our life, when we're in sleep states, and perhaps as much as 1/10 or 15th of our life, when we're in deep dreamless sleep, we have no conflict with each other. No conflict. None. Conflict is absent.
Yeah.
And we all cycle through that. We all cycle through that. And that's where we regenerate, where we renew, where our soul renews. We wake up and forget. So the process for me is this deep remembering, constant remembering, so that recognition, that remembering of our true nature can start to permeate and infuse all states, our work, our relationships, our family, our creative pursuits. It infuses everything with that deep remembering. And that's what creates a deep sense of relief and release in our body minds. And our body reflects that. The health of our body reflects that.
It's a superpower, isn't it? It really is.
It is.
One that I think what in your work, and I've known you a long time, that you're talking about a reclaiming of something that's already there, but awakening to something that already is, to claim it. Because it's there to be claimed. It's waiting to be claimed. It's longing to be claimed. It calls us to claim it.
Yes. It's much more of a claiming than a reclaiming. When we've forgotten, it feels like we have to reclaim it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I had a very extraordinarily busy day today, and I have a rhythm, my own rhythm. I talk about circadian rhythms and ultradian rhythms, and my own rhythm round about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, between 3 and 4:30 p.m. There's a dip for me, and it's really fabulous if it's possible for me to do my meditation practice at that time, because it changes everything. It ends the scramble and it deeply replenishes. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's an hour and a half. If I am in a luxury situation, is a luxury to me that I can stop at that point in a day, because I very often work all evening. And when that happens, it is so deeply replenishing. It's like I get 2 days out of one. And
Yeah.
today I set myself up for that half-hour break, and it eluded me every 20 minutes. And
Yeah.
I started to get to a point just today where I was getting cross with myself because I knew I was it's like letting an eel go in the water, that I just got the end of its tail, and and I felt it go. And I was so cross with myself because I didn't renew the day.
Yeah.
You know? And it
Hmm.
was, I let it become very, very disturbed. And therefore it really was a huge effort. In fact, when you asked me, could we do 10 more minutes? I was like, oh, thank goodness I could just shut my eyes for a moment and just restore. Because
Yeah.
I didn't want to be late. But at the same time, I was like, oh, thank goodness I can breathe. And it's maybe, I've always thought it's because I'm older now, but that if I do without that now, I feel as if I've cheated myself.
Right. Yep.
I've cheated the quality of the other side of that.
Yep.
But it's almost like wakening up to a new day again. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. It's very renewing. Yes. And it's just really important to, so working with this cyclical time and space is when you recognize that as your touch point into poise and grace, that you make that pattern, you create a rhythm around that, like you do. Like, hopefully everyone's day has a natural dip.
Mm.
And in that natural dip is the opportunity. The natural dip happens on many levels, and we can experience that as like, oh, just a time out for myself where I can drop in. I don't have to fulfill other people's expectations. I'm no longer working. Maybe it's just going out for a walk with your dog. Whatever the dip is, and it's different for everyone, take
Mhm.
advantage of that as a portal into remembering something that's much more nourishing, much more replenishing, so that we don't forget and we remind ourselves, we create the cycle, the cyclical access to that every day.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it actually has to become a discipline to start with.
It
I don't
does.
think it
Yeah.
needs to become a discipline for long, because it becomes such a joyful, like I cheated myself today, but I can get out of the habit. That's the other thing, isn't it? It's almost like we're training ourselves into a habit that's super valuable, instead of a habit of reaching for a coffee or reaching for the glass of wine. It's like reaching for the timeout,
Yeah.
because there's nothing happening. It's not a dopamine hit. The aftermath is amazing. It's worth an entire season on Netflix. But it's like you actually have to consciously and conscientiously train yourself that period of doing nothing, because it's not exciting.
Yeah.
It's almost a self-imposed stop
Yeah.
for its own sake. And I think we almost have to, I mean, I'll share something with you. I remember I've shared this in previous podcasts. I had a client once who came to me, and I think she'd had 2 hip replacements, a knee replacement, and an ankle repair. And she came to my yoga class, wonderful woman, absolutely adore her. And she came having had another knee replacement. They knew that that's what was going to happen. They were just kind of pacing the time to have these so-called joint replacements. And all I was doing really was a kind of a restorative breathing work that just got motion and gentle micro movements and access to a subtle ability to walk, because one of her joys was going for walks.
Yeah.
And something went wrong with this second knee replacement, and it was quite a big drama. And actually she called me because her opposite shoulder was in agony. And she came to see me with this shoulder pain. And I said, I can't deal with this shoulder pain because it's the result of the other knee, because the scar had become septic and it was clearly a problem. So I had to send her to a hospital, in fact. And basically, after that was all resolved, we did some work on the scars and we just did some quiet stuff and we kind of restored something. And I felt quite sort of chuffed with myself. I mean, I wasn't as old in the tooth as I am now, but I wanted a bit of feedback. And I will never forget, she taught me one of the finest lessons of my bodywork career. She stood there when she finished, and I was really waiting for her to say, "Thank you so much. I really love your work," and all this. Because, we do. I mean, you might not need to, but I need a little bit of feedback from people. And I was dying for her to say, "Oh, that's wonderful. I feel fantastic." And I remember standing there and I looked at her and I said, how do you feel? And she said, "I feel nothing." And I just remember standing there like the echo, as if I was in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And all I heard was this echo of nothing. And I could actually almost feel a presence there giggling at me, like, "That got you." Teaching how someone is. I was like, oh. And I was beginning to give myself a hard time, like, well, Joe, you shouldn't ask people how they are. You shouldn't be looking for compliments, and you shouldn't be. I do that. I tell myself off something chronic. And I stood there and I looked at her and I said, "You feel nothing?" And she went, "I feel nothing." Okay. And she looked at me and said, "You don't understand, do you?" So brilliant. I love this woman. She knows who she is. If you're listening to this, just adore you. And she said, "I feel nothing. And this is the first time in absolutely months that I can stand on my feet and feel nothing."
Mm.
And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Nothing hurts. Nothing's calling for my attention. Nothing's aching. Nothing's itching. Nothing's irritating me. Nothing's happening. I'm standing here, nothing."
Mm. Yeah. Beautiful.
And I thought to myself, holy Moses, that's one of the problems. That actually, when people come to us in pain, they want the pain to go away, but they don't come with a request for nothing. But that's actually what they're asking for. They want to feel nothing. They want to
Yeah.
go for a walk and feel just the fabulousness of the walk. They want to feel nothing in their body but improved joy or more spring or more enthusiasm or more life force or more vitality.
Yeah.
But they actually want to feel nothing.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it's like, how often do you experience the joy of that relief moment when you feel nothing? It's like, when you float on water in a beautiful sea and the sun shining. I can't remember the last time I did that, but there's this nothingness.
Yes.
And that's what you're doing. You're talking about generating and habituating a moment every day where you give
Yes.
yourself nothingness.
Yes. Yes.
Is that right?
Eh,
Is
yes.
that accurate?
Yes. Yes. And we're incredibly uncomfortable with nothing
Yes, exactly.
because we're highly addicted to something and everything as opposed to nothing. And what I take people on the journey through my coaching work is to recognize nothing is not actually empty. It's infinite possibility and potential.
Hmm.
Nothing is not to be confused with empty, void. Nothing is not the void.
No.
Although it can feel like that, but it's rich with possibility, what I call emergence.
Resource.
But yeah, it's infinite resource. And we can experience that when we're in our bodies and we're feeling pain-free and we're not bound by the stories of what our bodies can and can't do. See, you go back to these beads analogy, when we're, for a lot of people, past the 40th bead of life, there's all sorts of culturally inherited stories about what our body's capable of and not capable of. It actually happens much earlier, 30s. When we see kids, you hear it through language. I go to the sort of the jungle gym outdoor workout areas, playgrounds, and I do all my workouts outdoors. So I'm hanging out with the kids working out. But I hear the parents commenting about what their kids are doing. And they're like, oh, I can't do, no way I can do that. I could do that when I was a kid, but not now. And these are narratives, deeply embedded narratives and cultural stories that impose limitations on our bodies, unnecessary impositions on our body. So that wherever we're on that string of life, that when we go 30, 40, 50, 60, the stories become more and more binding and limiting about what our bodies are capable of, what our minds are capable of, what we're capable of. And that creates and imposes an energetic somatic architecture within our bodies that binds us to a particular expression.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then our bodies become a crystallized expression of that belief.
Yeah.
So accessing our true nature, or this nothingness rather than something, and we start to train our body minds to experience the grace and poise and possibility of being in that state where we feel nothing. Therefore, any expression is possible. And it's not time bound, it's not narrative bound, it's not conceptually bound to where we are at this stage of life. It's like, from a cyclical time, space-time perspective, we can start to recognize that these patterns repeat, so that I can experience this sense of playfulness, this sense of ease and gracefulness and spring in my body, because I've experienced it over and over and over again. We just have to keep the pattern going. We have to keep the habit going so that we don't forget that spring in our body, that easefulness, that grace, that sense of playfulness. We keep practicing, remembering over and over and over, so we don't lose that.
Amen.
Yeah.
And that, my dear friend, is just the beginning of this conversation. So I have a huge request for you. And that is that we do this again and we go to the next level, because I know there's more levels of time.
Yes, there are. I didn't get into resonant time and space.
Well, I'm holding you to that. So will you come again and talk to me about it?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Shane.
Yeah, love this, Jo.
Yeah. Oh, I love you.
Love you too. Thanks for creating this space and opportunity to just explore and have fun.
It's just brilliant. So for anybody that wants to know more about Shane McDermott, details of how you can contact him are underneath the show notes if it's a podcast, and you'll find it underneath the video if you're watching this on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, because then you'll be first to know about the next one, because we're going to put this all in a playlist for you on YouTube, because there's more wisdom where this comes from. I have the great privilege of knowing this man for more than 2 decades, and I can't wait to tap this treasure chest of wisdom. Thanks so much.